What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel today. We are talking about something that is absolutely shaking the foundations of the Western world. And honestly, most Americans have no idea just how fast and how deep this shift is happening. We are talking about Europe's massive continent-wide immigration policy reversal. And I don't mean some fringe far-right movements that get a few protest votes and then disappear. I mean mainstream governments left-wing, center-left, center-right, conservatives all slamming the brakes, building walls, cutting welfare, passing draconian laws, and even paying people cash to get out of the country. Now, if you had said this 10 or 15 years ago, you would have been crucified. You say one word against open borders, just one, and they'd slap a label on you. Racist, backward, Islamophobic, xenophobic, populist, you name it, the mainstream media, the university professors. The EU bureaucrats, the progressive politicians, they all came down on you like a ton of bricks. They said your thinking was outdated, that you needed to be re-educated, that you were on the wrong side of history. Well, guess what? History has a funny way of proving people wrong, because today things are completely different. Country in Europe is changing the rules. Border walls are going back up, not just fences, but real steel barriers with cameras, sensors, and drones. Asylum policies are getting tighter and tighter. Deportation flights are increasing. And some countries are going even further. They used to give free housing to migrants. And now they're literally handing out cash and saying, please take this money and leave. That is a massive reversal. And the crazy part, these used to be fringe ideas that only a few politicians dared to whisper. Now they're mainstream policy across multiple European nations. The countries that once threw their doors wide open to the world are now scrambling to shut them, and they're doing it faster than anyone expected. So what happened? Why the dramatic shift? Simple reality bit back. Hard failed integration. Parallel societies that don't mix with the mainstream. Exploding gang crime. Welfare systems that are completely stretched to the breaking point. Housing shortages, cultural clashes, terror attacks, and ordinary citizens, the actual voters, they've had enough. They look around and see their neighborhoods changing, their safety declining, their taxes rising to pay for services that aren't even for them, and they're saying no more for the past decade. These issues were practically undiscussable in polite political circles. You couldn't even raise them without being attacked. But now, these same political positions are winning elections big time. And it's not just one country. It's happening all over Europe all at once. So today, let's do a deep dive. Let's go through 9 European countries that are tightening their immigration policies. And I mean really tightening them and show you exactly what's happening, why it's happening, and what it means for the rest of the world. Let's start with Greece. Greece, from Europe's soft underbelly to a fortified front line. Greece is geographically very close to the Islamic world. It's literally Europe's front door to the Middle East and North Africa. Over the past decade, Greece has been on the absolute front line of Europe's migration crisis. Between 2015 and 2019, roughly 1 million migrants poured through the Greek islands and the land border with Turkey. The Coast Guard was completely overwhelmed. They simply didn't have the resources to handle that kind of volume islands, like Lesbos, Chios. And Samos, beautiful tourist destinations, basically turned into giant temporary refugee camps. These places were never designed to hold masses of people, but they became holding pens for tens of thousands. At its peak, the Moria camp on the island of Lesbos, which was built for a few thousand people at most, was crammed with approximately 40,000 human beings. Let that sink in. 40,000 people in a facility designed for maybe 2,000. The average living space was less than 2 square meters per person. That's smaller than a prison cell. It was a humanitarian disaster in slow motion, and the local economy destroyed. Tourism, which is the lifeblood of these islands, took a massive hit between 2016 and 2018. Tourism revenue dropped by roughly 23%. Hotels were empty, restaurants were struggling, and locals were furious. The residents of Lesbos had seen enough in 2020. They actually blocked riot police from entering the island to expand the camps. They physically stood in the way and said, no more. But today, Greece has completely transformed. It used to be Europe's soft underbelly, the easiest entry point into the Schengen zone. Now it has become one of Europe's toughest defenses. What did they do first? They built a physical barrier along the Evros River border, which separates Greece from Turkey. They constructed a 5-meter high steel wall. That's over 16 feet tall. The wall currently stretches more than 37 kilometers. That's about 23 miles, and it's equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance technology. thermal imaging cameras, motion sensors, and monitoring towers that watch every movement day and night, and they're not stopping there. In February of this year, 2026, the Greek Prime Minister confirmed that they are extending the wall to cover the entire 200-kilometer land border with Turkey. A new 27-kilometer section is already under construction as we speak. This is not a symbolic gesture. This is a serious military-grade border fortification. So what's the result? The numbers speak for themselves. In the first 7 months of last year, illegal crossings in the Evros region dropped by roughly 26% compared to the same period the year before. Total annual entries into Greece fell from over 62,000 to approximately 48,700. That's a drop of about 21% in just 1 year. But Greece didn't stop at the wall. They also changed the laws dramatically. Asylum seekers who get rejected now have to leave Greek territory within 14 days. That's it, 2 weeks. If they don't, they face criminal penalties, including possible prison sentences of 2 to 5 years. That is extremely rare in the European Union. Most countries have much longer timelines and multiple appeal opportunities. Greece is essentially saying, you came, you applied, you got rejected, now get out. Fast. And those overcrowded island camps that once held tens of thousands, the population has now dropped to fewer than 2,000 people total across all the islands. The Coast Guard has also stepped up maritime interceptions. They're actively stopping boats before they even enter Greek territorial waters, turning them back to Turkey or wherever they came from. No landing, no asylum claim, no problem. The country that was once Europe's easiest entry point is now one of its most heavily fortified borders. That is a complete 180, and it happened in just a few years. Netherlands, the tolerance capital, reconsiders everything. Now let's head northwest to the Netherlands. For decades, for generations, really the Dutch have prided themselves on being the most open, tolerant, multicultural society in Europe, maybe in the entire world. They embraced diversity before it was fashionable, back in the 1960s. They actively recruited guest workers from Turkey and Morocco. Over time, multiculturalism became woven into the very fabric of Dutch national identity. It wasn't just a policy, it was who they were. But even the Netherlands has changed, and changed hard. The breaking point came in August 2022. There's a small town called Ter Apel, not a big city, just a quiet little place. It had an asylum registration center designed to hold a few hundred people. But suddenly, over 700 asylum seekers showed up at once. The national system had no room for them, nowhere to put them. So what happened? Hundreds of people ended up sleeping on grass on the ground for weeks on end. In the open, in the rain. And tragically, a 3-month-old baby died at that site, a tiny infant dead in a European asylum center. That image, that tragedy, completely shattered the Dutch public's trust in the system. Emodicen, Sans Frontières Doctors Without Borders, an organization that usually operates in war zones. Famine regions and refugee camps in the developing world had to launch an emergency operation inside the Netherlands. A founding member of the European Union, a wealthy, developed first world country. And they needed Doctors Without Borders to deal with their own asylum crisis. That's how bad it got. That moment changed everything in Dutch politics. In November 2023, the anti-immigration Freedom Party, led by Geert Wilders, won the most seats in the Dutch parliament. Their platform, the toughest anti-immigration agenda Europe has seen in decades. They campaigned on closing borders, ending asylum, deporting illegals, and the voters responded. Then in July 2024, the new coalition government took office with a clear mandate: create the strictest asylum regime in Dutch history. This is not some fringe Eastern European country. This is the Netherlands, a founding EU member, the home of international courts and liberal values. And they promised to slam the door shut. What did they do? They passed emergency measures through Parliament. They canceled permanent residency, permits no more automatic path to staying. They restricted family reunification. Only spouses and minor children can now apply. No more extended family chains. And they expanded government powers to detain illegal migrants. Longer detention, less judicial oversight. Now here's the really interesting part. Even the moderate politicians are on board. Last June 2025, the government coalition actually collapsed because of immigration disputes. The Freedom Party thought the government wasn't moving fast enough, so they walked out. That forced an early election in October. And in that election, a centrist figure, Rob Jetten, won and became the youngest prime minister in Dutch history, taking office in February of this year. But here's what the mainstream media in America didn't highlight. Even Jetten, the centrist, the moderate. The young fresh face, even he explicitly said he wants to reduce asylum applications, speed up deportations, and explore processing asylum claims entirely outside the EU. That's not a fringe position anymore, that's the new center. What used to be called far-right policy in the Netherlands is now the mainstream. The Dutch are no longer asking, what can we accept? They're asking, what can we not accept? And they're drawing a very clear line. France, the Enlightenment nation, slams the door. Now let's talk about France, the country that gave the world the Declaration of the Rights of Man, the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The country that famously welcomed refugees and political exiles for centuries. But even France has turned a corner. In 2024, France deported roughly 22,000 people, and that is the highest number of deportations in modern French history, not just in recent years in modern history. And that number was up 27% from the year before. So we're talking about a sharp, deliberate acceleration. But this isn't just about statistics. This is about deep structural failure that has been building for decades. For more than 20 years, the suburbs around major French cities, Paris, Lyon, and Marseille, have slowly turned into isolated zones. These are called the banlieues in French. And in many of these areas, you have high unemployment, deteriorating public services, rampant crime, and police who often don't even dare to go in. Some neighborhoods have effectively become no-go zones separated from mainstream French society by physical and cultural barriers. In some of these suburbs, unemployment rates run at 40 to 50%. That's not a typo. Half the working age population doesn't have a job. And it's been like that for years. In 2005, France experienced massive riots across the country. Over 10,000 vehicles were burned by rioters. That wasn't a one-time thing, it was a symptom of a deeper problem. Since 2015, French security forces have foiled more than 250 extremist attack plots. That's an average of about 25 to 30 plots per year, year after year. And let's not forget the visible signs we've seen: illegal migrant camps popping up along the Seine River in Paris, right in the heart of the city. Even near the Eiffel Tower, one of the most iconic landmarks in the world, there have been illegal encampments. That's not a third world country, that's the capital of France. So the political mood shifted in 2024. France got a new interior minister, and he made a very clear statement. He declared, and I'm quoting directly, "The era of mass immigration is over." That is a dramatic statement from a French government official. And then they started acting. The government began systematically dismantling illegal street camps, no more tolerated encampments. They extended the detention period for illegal migrants from 90 days to 210 days, more than double. And they closed a major loophole. Previously, rejected asylum seekers could appeal their decisions over and over again, dragging out the process for an average of 4.7 years. That's almost 5 years of stalling. That loophole is now closed. Once you're rejected, the process moves much faster, but the biggest change, the one that has the most long-term impact, is on citizenship. France has had birthright citizenship just solely for over a century. If you're born on French soil, you get French nationality. It's been that way since the late 1800s. But now the government is pushing to restrict that principle in France's overseas territories. And in early 2025, the French Supreme Court backed those changes. That's a major shift in a century-old tradition. And here's the number that should really make you pay attention. Public opinion polls show that roughly 80% of French citizens support stronger immigration controls. That's 8 out of 10 people. Even voters with immigrant backgrounds, people whose families came from North Africa or other regions, are starting to support tougher rules. That tells you the consensus has completely shifted. Germany, the biggest reversal of all. Now we have to talk about Germany because this is the big one. This is Europe's largest economy. It's political heavyweight, and for years. The global symbol of open-door humanitarian policy, remember 2015? That was the year Chancellor Angela Merkel made her famous decision. She opened Germany's borders and welcomed over 1.2 million asylum seekers in a single year. That was a massive, unprecedented wave of migration. Germany's political elite, the establishment, kept defending that decision. No matter what happened, they insisted it was the right thing to do. They doubled down on it, but then the violence started, and it didn't stop. Let me walk you through the sequence of events, because this is what finally broke the German public's patience. May 2024, the city of Mannheim, an Afghan asylum seeker, attacked an anti-Islam rally and stabbed a police officer to death. A police officer killed by someone who was supposed to be seeking protection in Germany. August 2024, the city of Solingen. A Syrian man carried out a knife attack and killed 3 civilians. And here's the really frustrating part: his deportation order had been issued earlier, but it was never executed. He was supposed to be gone, but he was still there, and 3 people died because of that failure. December 2024, the Magdeburg Christmas market. This was a horrific attack. A car was driven into a crowded market. 5 people were killed. Over 200 people were injured. Families enjoying Christmas festivities, and suddenly carnage. January 2025, the city of Aschaffenburg. An Afghan asylum seeker with mental health issues attacked and murdered a 2-year-old child and a 41-year-old man. A toddler killed by someone who should never have been in the country. Back to back to back to back to back. 4 major attacks in less than a year. And that was the breaking point. In February 2025, Friedrich Merz and his Christian Democratic Union, the CDU, won the federal election. And his campaign was built largely around one issue: immigration crackdown. He promised to reverse Merkel's policies. His critics even said he had absorbed some of the positions of the far-right alternative for Germany, the AfD, but Merz didn't care. He ran on it, and he won. Then in May 2025, the moment he took office, his very first major act was to cancel Merkel's 2015 policy. That policy allowed undocumented people to enter Germany and apply for asylum. It was the symbol of the open door era. And Merkel's own party, the CDU, terminated it. That was a powerful message, but Merz didn't stop there. Germany restored border controls with all 9 of its neighboring countries. Let me say that again, all 9 of them. That means every single land border into Germany now has systematic checks, and that effectively suspends the Schengen Agreement, one of the fundamental pillars of European integration. Schengen guaranteed free movement across borders, no passport controls, no checkpoints. That's now gone for Germany. This is not a small adjustment. It's a fundamental rethinking of European unity. What was the impact on migration numbers? In 2023, Germany received about 352,000 asylum applications. That was the peak after the border controls were strengthened. That number dropped to about 250,000 in 2024, and Merz's government has set a much more aggressive target. They want to push asylum applications below 100,000 by 2026. Early data already shows that new applications are down by more than half year over year, so the policies are working. At least in terms of numbers, public opinion has shifted dramatically too. Multiple surveys show that by 2025, about 75% of Germans, 3 out of every 4, believe that their country took in too many migrants over the past decade. That's a massive consensus. Germany has also restarted deportation flights to Syria and Afghanistan, countries that were previously considered too dangerous to send people back to. Last July, in coordination with Qatar, Germany sent back 81 Afghan nationals on a single flight. German media called these operations deportation accelerators, because what used to take years of legal battles and administrative delays can now be done in weeks or months. They're also renegotiating deportation agreements with migrant source countries. Agreements that used to take decades to negotiate are now moving at record speed. And then there's the moment that really caused a firestorm in October of last year, 2025, at a public event in Potsdam. Merz said something that made national headlines. He said, and I'm quoting him directly, "Many Germans today are afraid to walk into public spaces because of immigrants who don't work and don't obey our laws." That statement triggered massive outrage. 5,000 people marched in Berlin to protest. The media attacked him, but Merz didn't apologize. He didn't walk it back. He stood by his words. That is the leader of Europe's biggest economy telling the world that the old consensus is over, and he doesn't care who gets upset about it. Italy pushing the border south. Now let's head to southern Europe, to Italy. Italy has been on the front lines of the Mediterranean migration crisis since 2015. Hundreds of thousands of people have crossed the sea from North Africa, trying to reach European soil. And the vast majority, over 85%, come from Muslim-majority countries. In 2023, Italy received more than 157,000 migrants by sea. That's a huge number of small cities worth of people arriving by boat. But then in 2024, something changed. That number dropped to about 66,000, a decrease of nearly 60% in just 1 year. So what caused that dramatic drop? It started with one small island, Lampedusa. Lampedusa has about 6,000 permanent residents. Not a big place, but in just 24 hours in September 2023, more than 7,000 migrants landed there. That's more people in one day than the entire local population. The island was completely overwhelmed. The reception center there was designed to hold 400 people, but it ended up crammed with over 4,000. The situation was so bad that the island declared a state of emergency. So Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni did something unconventional. She decided not to just build a wall, but to push the border overseas. In November 2023, Italy signed a deal with Albania. Yes, Albania across the Adriatic Sea to set up Italian-run migrant processing centers on Albanian territory. These centers can handle up to 36,000 migrants per year. The process works like this. Migrants picked up at sea are sent to Albania, not Italy. There, their claims are processed by Italian officials. If they're approved, they get to enter Italy. If they're denied, they get deported directly from Albania, never setting foot on Italian or European soil. Now, I have to be honest, this plan has faced legal challenges. Italian courts have repeatedly ordered some migrants to be brought back from Albania. The EU Court of Justice has raised questions. So these centers have been operating at low capacity because of all the lawsuits. But Meloni hasn't given up. She sees these as procedural obstacles, not fundamental flaws. Her direction is clear. Keep pushing. But Italia's real success came from a different approach: cooperation with North African countries. The Italian government poured more than 800 million euros. That's close to 870 million US dollars into Tunisia and Libya. The goal: pay them to stop the boats from leaving in the first place. And it worked. Departure numbers from those countries dropped by roughly 60%. At the same time, Italy cracked down on rescue NGOs, the private ships that go out to pick up migrants at sea. They impose strict restrictions. Unauthorized rescue operations can now face fines up to 50,000 euros, and ships can be seized. As a result, publicly monitored rescue operations dropped by about 40%. Italy is doing something very simple but very effective. It's not just closing its own border, it's moving that border hundreds of kilometers to the south, pushing the responsibility onto other countries. Sweden, the humanitarian dream, turns into a nightmare. Now let's go north to Sweden. Sweden was the gold standard of European humanitarianism for decades. The world looked at Sweden as the model of compassion and generosity. In 2015 alone, during the peak of the crisis, Sweden took in about 163,000 asylum seekers. That's about 1.6% of the country's total population, the highest per capita intake in the entire European Union. For decades, the Swedish model was built on a simple belief: if you give people welfare, education, housing, and opportunities, they will eventually integrate into society. They believe that culture doesn't matter, that the system can absorb anyone. But by the early 2020s, that model started to fall apart dramatically. Sweden began making headlines for all the wrong reasons: gang shootings, hand grenade attacks, residential explosions. These weren't rare events, they became regular news. Police data shows that in 2011, there were only 17 gang-related shootings in all of Sweden. By 2022, that number had jumped to 62, almost 4 times as many. Hand grenade attacks, explosions went from fewer than 5 per year to a peak of 39 in a single year. And these weren't random. The violence was concentrated in specific neighborhoods, immigrant-heavy areas where over 60% of the residents have non-Western backgrounds. In those neighborhoods, the murder rate for young men is 3 times the national average. Sweden actually became one of the countries with the highest rates of gun crime in all of Europe. Think about that. Sweden, the peaceful, neutral, compassionate country, now has a gun crime problem worse than most of its neighbors. So in October 2022, a new coalition government came to power. They cut a deal with the Sweden Democrats, a party that was once considered politically toxic, too far right to touch. But the coalition needed their support, and they made a deal. Formally reversed decades of immigration policy. And the results came quickly. By the second half of 2024, Sweden's Statistics Bureau released a stunning number. For the first time in over 50 years, certain non-Western immigrant groups showed net negative migration. That means more Iraqis left Sweden than arrived, more Somalis left than arrived, more Syrians left than arrived. Approved asylum permits in 2024 dropped to just 6,250, the lowest number in 40 years. Compare that to the 163,000 in 2015. That's a drop of more than 96%. It's almost zero. And Sweden is now actively paying people to leave. They've expanded a voluntary return program that offers up to 350,000 Swedish kroner. That's about 34,000 US dollars per adult who agrees to return to their home country. The government did the math. A one-time payment of a few tens of thousands of dollars is cheaper than decades of welfare, housing, healthcare, and social services. Between 2016 and 2023, about 25,000 people left Sweden through forced deportations or voluntary returns. But the most controversial policy by far is the duty to report law. Under this law, teachers, doctors, nurses, social workers, and local government employees are legally required to report anyone they suspect is in the country illegally. If you think someone doesn't have valid papers, you have to notify the authorities, no exceptions. And illegal residents lose all welfare benefits. No housing, no healthcare, no financial support. The country that once defined European compassion is now one of its toughest enforcers. That's a transformation that would have been unthinkable just a decade ago. Denmark, the zero ambition. Now let's look at Denmark, and they've been watching Sweden very closely. Denmark decided that just reducing immigration wasn't enough. They wanted to completely reshape the entire system. Denmark's social democratic government, yes, that's the left-wing party, has openly declared that mass immigration is threatening everyday Danish life. And here's the bombshell: their official target is zero, not less zero spontaneous asylum applications. That's the goal. Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen has been driving this agenda since she took office in 2019. By 2024, Denmark approved only 864 asylum applications, one of the lowest numbers in 4 decades. Frederiksen says that the only legal way into Denmark should be through government-selected quota refugees, people who are screened and approved before they arrive, not uncontrolled mass applications. Denmark's approach has 3 main pillars. First, move the asylum process overseas. In 2021, Denmark passed a law allowing asylum claims to be processed in third countries, potentially in Africa. Applicants could be sent to a country outside Europe to wait for their decision. If they're approved, they might not even get to enter Denmark. They could be settled elsewhere. If they're denied, they get deported directly from that third country. No foot on Danish soil. Second, dismantle parallel societies. Denmark created a legal concept called parallel societies. It specifically targets neighborhoods where non-Western residents make up more than 50% of the population, where welfare dependency is high, and where school performance is well below the national average. These areas get special designations, and crimes committed there carry heavier penalties. To break up these immigrant clusters between 2019 and 2023, the cities of Copenhagen, Aarhus, and others demolished more than 10,000 public housing units. They physically tore down buildings to prevent ghettos from forming. Third, tighten family reunification to the extreme. Both spouses must be over 24 years old. They must pass a Danish language test. The Danish partner cannot have been on long-term welfare. And the government even runs advertising campaigns in migrants' home countries, directly telling people Denmark is not your destination. They're not being subtle about it. They're actively discouraging people from coming. Poland hybrid warfare at the border. Now let's go to Eastern Europe, to Poland. And I want to emphasize this. What's happening in Poland is not the same as in Western Europe. For Poland, this isn't primarily a social welfare issue or a cultural debate. It's a matter of national security. Poland's 418-kilometer border with Belarus, that's about 260 miles, has been turned into what intelligence agencies call a migration weaponization zone. It's a hybrid warfare operation backed by Russia. Here's how it works. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, with active support from Russian intelligence, started flying in thousands of migrants from countries like Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, and Yemen. They brought these people to the Belarusian capital, Minsk, and then organized them into groups and sent them toward the Polish border. And here's the really dirty part: Belarusian border guards actually gave these migrants wire cutters, flashlights, and cold weather gear. They were facilitating the crossing not to help the migrants, but to create chaos. What was the goal? To overwhelm Europe's asylum system, to destabilize Poland politically, to create a humanitarian crisis on European soil, to weaken EU unity, to force the EU to make concessions. This was a coordinated campaign, a weaponization of desperate people. Poland's response was swift and decisive. In January 2022, they started building a steel barrier. The wall is 186 kilometers long, about 115 miles, and 5.5 meters high, over 18 feet tall. It's topped with razor wire. It's equipped with high-definition cameras, ground radar, seismic sensors, drone patrols, and AI-based anomaly detection systems. This is not a simple fence, it's a high-tech border defense system. The total cost was about 1.6 billion zloty, roughly 350 million euros, and it was funded entirely from Poland's defense budget, not from social welfare or development funds. And it was completed in just 9 months fast, efficient, military-style execution in March 2025. Prime Minister Donald Tusk, and this is important because Tusk is a pro-European centrist, not a right-wing nationalist. His government passed a law that temporarily suspended asylum rights in the border zone. Under this law, anyone caught trying to cross illegally in the designated buffer zone can be turned back immediately. No asylum interview, no appeal. Just sent back. This law has been extended multiple times. The latest extension keeps it in effect through the summer of 2026. Now, I know the critics have been loud. The European Commission says it may violate EU law. Amnesty International has strongly criticized it. The European Parliament has questioned its legality, but Tusk isn't backing down, and his explanation is worth hearing. He says this is not an ordinary migration flow. This is a Russian intelligence operation. And these people are not genuine refugees. They are tools being used against his country. And the results speak for themselves. After the barrier became fully operational, the number of successful illegal crossings dropped by nearly 50% in the first year. Today, Poland's Muslim population is still below 0.1%, less than 1 in 1,000 people. Hungary, the pioneer that was right all along. Finally, we come to Hungary, the country that started the whole shift and the one that got punished the most for it. Back in 2015, at the height of the migration crisis, when most European leaders were still preaching open borders and humanitarian values, Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán did something that was considered almost unthinkable at the time. He built a wall, a physical barrier. Orbán ordered the construction of a 175-kilometer razor wire fence along Hungary's borders with Serbia and Croatia, the main entry routes for migrants coming from the Balkans. And the reaction from Europe was furious. The EU was outraged. The European Commission launched legal proceedings against Hungary. The European Court of Justice later fined Hungary 200 million euros, that's about 218 million US dollars, plus a daily penalty of 1 million euros for each day they didn't comply with EU asylum rules. International media attacked Orbán relentlessly. They compared him to dictators from the 20th century. He was vilified, demonized, and isolated, but Orbán didn't change course, and here's why. Look at the numbers. In September 2015, the peak of the crisis, more than 30,000 illegal crossings were recorded per month at the Hungarian border. By early 2016, just a few months after the wall went up, that number dropped to under 300 per month. That's a 99% reduction in just 4 months. 4 months from 30,000 to 300. By 2022, Hungary, a country of about 9.7 million people, received only 29 asylum applications for the entire year. 29, that's not per Dalton Y, not per month, that's the whole year. And in 2024, still 29, practically zero. Meanwhile, Germany is spending tens of billions of euros every year on migration-related costs. Sweden is dealing with gang violence and grenade attacks. France is tearing down illegal camps in Paris, and Hungary has virtually none of those problems. The foreign-born Muslim population in Hungary is under 0.5%, less than 1 in 200. Now here's the twist, and it's a big one. On April 12th of this year, 2026, Hungary held parliamentary elections, and Viktor Orbán's Fidesz party actually lost. The new centrist party, a coalition of opposition groups, won 141 seats, securing a parliamentary majority. Orbán's 16-year rule came to an end. But, and this is the critical point, the policies didn't change. The new government isn't tearing down the wall. They aren't opening the borders. They aren't reversing the asylum laws. The very policies that Europe spent a decade condemning are now being maintained by the new leaders. Hungary lost its prime minister, but the Hungarian model won the argument. The big picture Europe center has shifted. Now let's step back and look at the entire picture. You've got 9 European countries: Greece, the Netherlands, France, Germany, Italy, Sweden, Denmark, Poland, Hungary, all moving in the same direction. And here's what's really striking. These are not all coming from the same political corner. Denmark's prime minister is from the center left. Poland's Tusk is a pro-European centrist. The Netherlands just got a centrist coalition. Germany's Merz is conservative. Italis Maloney is right-wing. But they're all converging on the same set of policies: stricter border controls, faster deportations, fewer asylum approvals, reduced welfare for migrants. That tells you something fundamental has shifted in European politics. It's not that the whole continent suddenly turned extremist. It's that governments are finally looking at the data, and the data is undeniable. Welfare systems are buckling under the weight. Housing is becoming unaffordable. Social integration is failing in too many places. Crime rates are rising in immigrant-heavy neighborhoods, and the fiscal cost the money spent on migration is astronomical. Taxpayers are demanding accountability. For the past decade, open borders were treated as the only morally acceptable position in polite European society. If you questioned it, you were attacked. But now, in election after election, being pro-open borders has become a liability, and candidates who promise to close them are winning. So the debate going forward is this: is Europe correcting mistakes that were made years ago, or is it overcorrecting and heading towards something even more extreme? That argument is going to shape the continent for the next generation, but one thing is absolutely certain: the Europe of 2015 is gone. It's not coming back, and that matters to Americans too, because what happens in Europe, it affects global stability, trade, security, and the broader Western alliance. All right, that was a long one, but this is a massive topic and I wanted to give you the full picture. That's my take. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you think Europe is doing the right thing, or is this an overreaction? Hit that like button. If you appreciate the deep dive, subscribe if you haven't already. And turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.